Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you to our webinar today, Outcomes Are Just the Beginning, by Norm Rowen, who I'll introduce here in just a moment. My name is Alison Mullen, and I'm the Manager of Communications and Marketing here at Essential Skills Ontario. Just before we get started, I want to give you a few instructions. At the right-hand side of your screen is your dashboard. There you can chat with each other in the chat pane, and you can ask questions in the question pane. If it's a technical question, please ask it throughout the webinar, and Amber and I from Essential Skills Ontario will try to get back to you and assist you. And if you have any questions about the content, feel free to ask questions. Norm, the presenter, will be checking for questions throughout, and then we'll also have a Q&A at the end where you can ask questions as well. We really do want to make the webinar as interactive as we can. And if you'd like to participate on Twitter, just use the hashtag ESOWeb. Now on to introduce our presenter today. Norman Rowen is well known to the literacy and essential skills community through work such as More Walls Than Doors, People Over Programs, the Common Writing Assessment with Neil Graham, and Another Step Forward with Mary Ellen Balfour, and JobLink, Who Cares?, the evaluation of provincial OVS JobLink programs, among others. His most recent contributions include work to support the new OALCS, including the learner plan template and a discussion paper on service coordination. He was a volunteer tutor and founding director of Parkdale Project Read. Norm also designed, developed, and was the initial program director of the Pathways Education Program in Regent Park for the program's first 5 years. He continues to support the program and its replication as an original staff member and first director of research for Pathways Education Canada, which now supports Pathways programs in 11 communities across Canada. He has spoken about Pathways and its lessons across Canada, and has written several articles along with Pathways founder Carolyn Acker. Pathways is one of 12 international initiatives featured in Charles Ledbetter's Innovations in Education, which came out recently in 2012. So from there, I'm going to pass it over to Norman to get started. Thanks, everyone.
This is a unique experience for me. I'm not used to speaking to people without being able to see them. So Allison said this is just like talking to yourself, so I'm sorry if it seems from time to time that I go rather quickly through some things, and I'd really much rather people send questions as they occur to you, particularly if I've gone too quickly through something and you want to say go back or what did you mean by that or whatever. I'll say a bit more about Pathways in a minute, but in speaking with staff here, John McLaughlin and Allison, they thought it would be good for me to focus a bit on some of the things we learned through Pathways to Education. I'll give a little bit of a primer in a minute about Pathways, but for now maybe we can just move on. My screen is not working here. Oh, there we go. I've put together probably 3 objectives for the webinar, and I think they should be fairly clear. The first is to begin a conversation. We won't get further than just starting something today about how data can be used related to program improvement and what data can be used related to program improvement. The second is to begin a conversation about engaging practitioners in different types of program improvement, and I think there are some good examples of how practitioners in different environments have been able to do that, and by the end, hopefully a better understanding of a few things. One is what data to look at. Second would be how to look at some of it and what to do with it, how to use it, what's some of the data good for. The purpose of thinking about data, I guess, goes back to some of the things that have happened historically. Most institutional type programs, and I guess I'd include, K-12 education. I'd include most social service programs. Certainly most post-secondary programs used to be involved in monitoring inputs. That is, people would look at the time spent, the credentials of practitioners, student-teacher, or social work client ratios. The movement to outcomes happened, and practitioners, I think, have generally viewed this as being a problem about accountability, and that the reason to do it was accountability, to keep track of numbers, of outcomes, and the responsibility of program managers rather than practitioners. So part of today is to look at how those that same data about outcomes is really useful for program improvement. And yes, we are talking about the same data, at least as a starting point, and a process for identifying the other kinds of data which might be most useful. I think it's probably worth saying that increasingly funders, I would say both public and private funders, and by that I mean funders from foundations, corporations, labor unions, individuals, and most of Pathways to Education was supported this way before governments, that they've all focused now increasingly on outcomes. There's a beginning of a large literature in the fundraising sector about the importance of outcomes for how people actually make donations and provide support to places. I'd say the other thing about it is that if you look at most of the recent work, probably going back around 10 or 15 years, in workforce development throughout the United States, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, all of them for any kind of workforce development program, so getting social assistance recipients to be more involved in either education or work, they all have focused more and more increasingly talking about outcomes. Who can do this kind of work? Well, basically, we need to say that funders, politicians, bureaucrats all have an interest. They need a more high-level understanding. If we think about what's happened with Employment Ontario and EOIS CAMS as a database that holds these things, there's two kinds of data. There's many kinds of data that's in it, but there's two kinds of data to think about. One is the data that's there regarding outcomes. And I would say some of the analysis that we need to do has to do with background factors, who's coming to programs, and then what happens to them. But then there is also data on what kinds of services they've been provided with. That's all what I would call high-level data. Program providers need those understandings, but practitioners also need to develop the skills to support increased effectiveness, program improvement, by knowing who we're working with, what we're trying to achieve, and what approaches are most likely to be effective and for whom. I wanted to outline just briefly about Pathways to Education. I always assume, since I was immersed in it for over a decade, that everybody else knows about it. Of course, there are some people who've been doing other things with their lives and actually don't know about it. But Pathways started in 2001. I actually went in July of 2000 to begin the research that led to it. In Regent Park, through the Regent Park Community Health Center, and they had a vision that basically said that the kids from the community would grow up to be the doctors, nurses, social workers, administrators of the health center, and by extension that kids from the community take their rightful places. And when we're talking about a community, Regent Park still is the oldest and largest public housing project in Canada. It was notorious, I guess, before Jane Finch and Rexdale and a number of other places as being the location where refugees came first and where there were always gangs, violence, etc. The year we developed the program in Regent Park, there were 9 murders. So there was a real sense of hopelessness that existed that year. I went to Regent Park, and it was fairly important to try and address that. The process of developing the program included really years before I got there, focus groups, interviews, surveys with residents to develop the vision, and to deal with what became the intractable problem that people saw about school dropouts, but we'll get there in a minute. But the program was developed on the shoulders of many people. It was to address what the National Children's Agenda years ago talked about as 2 of the 4 key transition points. The first is from birth into school, second elementary to secondary, third secondary to post-secondary, and the fourth one was post-secondary into work and family responsibilities. The program itself became made up of these 4 supports people have heard about. There's tutoring, mentoring taking several forms we can talk about, financial support, and advocacy, a staff support, which we call a student-parent support worker. And basically the hypothesis was that with these supports, the kids in Regent Park could do as well as anybody else in terms of their school achievement. Other communities, based on the results of Regent Park, including the engagement, so now there are the 2007, 5 other communities. By 2011, 11 communities in 4 provinces, and Eventually, there will be a total of somewhere between 19 and 20 programs that are planned between now and 2015. I left Pathways to Education in Regent Park, along with Carolyn Acker, to set up Pathways Canada, which has a mandate to support the various of these 11 now and soon to be 20 communities. In 2006, after the first 5 years of the program in Regent Park, and we went, and I've left Pathways Canada formally in 2 years ago, in spring of 2010. As I said to Leslie here, Leary's life after Pathways, and it was beginning to be long days. Pathways started very much to address what you see here, which is statistics showing that in the former city of Toronto, the last cohort in the former city of Toronto, and again this was in 2000, after 7 years they had a dropout rate of 28%, whereas the kids in Regent Park had 56%. You can see the other things dropped the comparative rates for single-parent-led families, and for the kids of immigrants been here in the country less than 5 years and more than 5 years. Those figures that make up a lot of the Regent Park community were over 70%. It's important just to note in passing that before Pathways in 2000, nobody had ever asked for data from the school board by community, and this wasn't public data at the time. But it certainly motivated people in the community to say, we know what's wrong. They had an intuitive sense that something wasn't right, but they didn't know actually what happened to their kids after they left the local elementary schools. There's no public high school in Regent Park, so they all were scattered to what turned out to be first 16 and then many dozen high schools. Pathways to Education has several research components, but before I maybe go through that, it's probably worth recounting a story from a staff member who I guess confronted me as director in one of the staff meetings and said, Norman, you only care about the numbers. And he was pretty adamant about it, and I came back with 3 things that I've never forgotten. I can't believe I said them at the time, but they seem to be pretty important to people and have been ever since. The first is, if we don't have results, and positive results, we won't have a job. For the first 4 years of the program, there was not a nickel of government money. After that, there was about 15%. I think overall now it's probably 25 or 30%. But for those first years, we had to raise money without there being any too many results. And if we weren't getting results, my sense was none of us would be able to raise that money. The second is the program's too hard. Like most things that are worth doing, most problems that are intractable, the solutions are quite complex. And if we weren't getting results, we owed it to the community to try something different. And the third reason was that if frontline staff were doing their jobs, the results would follow. And I always felt that if the folks who had the direct relationships with the kids, as director I had some, but not a lot, but the students, these young people from grades 9 through 13, 9 through, I would say, into post-secondary. If the staff who dealt with them all the time, the student parent support workers, the tutor coordinators, the facilitators, the program facilitators, if they had the relationships which they wanted to have with the kids, the results would follow. And it always did. Those results always did. I had a background in research, 15 years at EOIS before I did other community work and before I did work in literacy, and certainly before I was in Regent Park. And one of the things I learned from that was about the multiple methods that we need to use. And so I knew I needed to build in some research from the beginning, and that included some particular quantitative indicators. School attendance and credit accumulation, as you'll see in a minute, were highly correlated with graduating or dropping out, as the case might be. And it was pretty important for us to be able to show funders that we didn't need to wait 4 or 5 years to get results, that we could show results very quickly. Graduation, obviously, was the next important result, post-secondary education, and then retention, access to post-secondary, and then retention and graduation from post-secondary. But there were a list of qualitative things we needed to do as well, and that talks more about the process by which we needed to get information about the program, information that was crucial for us to do program improvement. And so we started a regular process of student surveys and of focus groups with volunteer tutors and mentors, and an annual survey of those people. An annual survey, focus groups with parents in order to get their feedback, and these were held in their first language. Regent Park is, like many multicultural communities, has many second language speakers whose first languages are other than English or French, and the result was we needed to be able to give them the comfort of speaking in their first languages. So we held focus groups both before and developing the program and after in those first languages. We needed to get staff feedback, and I would do that both informally and formally. And we had planning sessions every year where we talked specifically about what we needed to do better and what we needed to do differently. And other feedback from teachers in the public schools and the separate schools, the high schools, from other partners who were helping to deliver programs or parts of the program components. Also, as we went on, we began to look a little bit more closely about the quality of relationships. And I'll come back to this in a bit, but the quality of relationships is a really key thing to focus on, whether you're in K-12 education, whether you're in literacy, whether you're in adult training, skills training, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in other social services. Charlie Leadbeater, who did that book on international innovations in education, also has done work on health and social services, and he says the innovative programs of the next while will be the ones that can marry an efficient system of delivery with the relationships that our clients need in order to be successful. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about relationships. And for that, we needed to think about what are the kinds of measures that will be indirect measures of the relationships, and then other kinds of impacts. Could we find other impacts in terms of mental health, both of individuals and the community, of income and employment as people went on? All of those things became important. These charts I'm not going to spend any time on, but these are just showing you why absenteeism and credit accumulation was so important. Rob Brown from the Toronto District School Board, one of their research coordinators, has done a great job on plotting this over a long period of time and being concerned about how these affect people's chances of success. But basically, you can see that if you had absenteeism of more than 10%, the odds of graduating are 50-50. If you go too high, the odds of graduating are slim and none. Same with credit accumulation. If at the end of grade 9 and grade 10 you were more than a few credits short, the odds of you graduating are kind of slim and none. So you can see both for grade 9 and 10 how that's true. I'm going to show just some very quick slides about how some of the data was used and what it meant. Part of the problem that we had in Regent Park was when people asked us, funders in particular, well, how do you know if you're making a difference? One of the ways we would know would be to compare the kids in Regent Park to the cohort of kids immediately preceding pathways to be able to say, what difference have we made? And those kids were identical in every way. This is just about absenteeism. It's one of the things we collected. And you can see over on the right in the purple, the left-hand bar in each column is the pre-pathways kids, and 24%, nearly a quarter of those, had more than 15% absenteeism. So those kids were in serious jeopardy long before they got through grade 9. You can see that the first three cohorts, the first two cut it in half, and the third cohort cut it by about 3/4, that proportion with serious absentee problems. This is how we first started showing credit accumulation. And this not only confirms the thing about the relationship between credit accumulation and attendance, but it also, I guess I can point to a couple other things on it, which is not just were we looking at the comparison of the kids historically, but also the other comparison we needed to make was with multiple cohorts. So it was keeping track not just of one cohort, but of many. You'll see from that, you'll see from the right-hand column of that 38% of the kids already were struggling at the end of grade 9 before the program. So if 38% of the kids were in so much trouble before they finished grade 9, it's not surprising that 56% maybe were dropping out. What we did with this, and you'll see this is just for reporting purposes, but you can see the same kinds of data only now for the first 5 communities, the first 5 other communities. And it shows the Regent Park folks on the left. The red ones are Lawrence Heights, then Rexdale, then Ottawa, Kitchener and then Ottawa, and you can see whether the percentages are the same or not. You can see roughly the same types of patterns. So the lesson from this is about reporting things in more than 1 year, in more than one cohort, and compared to historical folks. This last one in this series, there's one more after this. This one basically says we need to plot these over a period of time. This is just Regent Park, and what you can see is that pre-Pathways kids, that the first historical cohort, you can see how it went up from 36% in grade 9 to 47% in grade. By the time they got to grade 12, who were more than a year behind, who were struggling and not likely to graduate. The problem is in all of the colors underneath there, which is you can see that there's about, depending on the cohort, the trends are still in the right direction for the most part, but with each successive cohort, now this is just for each year, you can see that there's about somewhere between 10 and 20%, or roughly around 15%, who are struggling despite the supports that were being provided. So one of the key things as the program developed was to begin to ask the question, what distinguishes these kids? What are the kinds of things they're struggling with that even the supports as developed and as intensive as some of those supports were, that they weren't getting it? Finally, just to do the last bit of this, that we finally tracked the, I guess, the 4 or 5 key measures by the end of the program for those kids, which was to say the dropouts on the left, the next step, the ones that are still in high school, and that high bar is the ones who are still in grade 12. The 4-year, 5-year, and 6-year graduation rates, and this is the one which shows the middle line, or I should say the third from the left line, the buff-colored line, looks white to some people, I guess, is what the city average was. So you can see Pathways was behind the city average for 4-year graduates, but was ahead of it for 5-year graduates and ahead for total graduates, which would be those students who maybe needed 6 years. What did we learn from this? Well, when I was at Pathways Canada, a friend of ours, a colleague of ours, Peter O'Donnell, showed us this kind of slide that talks about emergent learning. And he said that this basically described the process that we went through in terms of moving from the kinds of data that we just looked at to the other kinds of data that we'll talk about again, but the qualitative data on how we were doing what we were doing, to learn what we could to make the program better. So I'm just going to walk through this slide. This is basically the framing question about saying, what will it take to achieve something? And you could put any something. I'll give you the Regent Park version or the Pathways version, and then we'll go through a literacy and basic skills version of this. So we already know a great deal, and we've talked, I mentioned already some of the things from Regent Park that we already knew, but with every iteration that you do of this, you already know certain things. We're not starting from a vacuum of no knowledge at all. The people from emergent learning call this these insights. And then we have hypotheses about what would make us more successful. We have opportunities to test those hypotheses, to try things. We can call those future action plans. And then we can take key moments, and I would add to that data of different kinds. Peter calls it grounded truth. They do here too. That would allow us to say, what is it we learned that would make us do things differently? So articulate, experiment, validate, and then filter. Take your knowledge and do something more with it. So for the Regent Park example, or the Pathways example, I would say this happened as consciously as we could have in designing the program. Without support, kids will fail. With support, our hypothesis would be that they would be more successful. So we had a mental model. We created this model that said there would be tutoring and mentoring, there would be financial supports, and there would be those staff supports that will matter. And we tested it. We provided those supports over a period of time, and we got data about it. We got data on credits and participation data on whether they were coming to tutoring or mentoring, and focus group data, and we fed that back. And what we found out was that we needed more contact. So we revised the hypothesis to say that we would make Pathways tutoring and mentoring compulsory, and that we would have more group mentoring. And I would say this came, when we go back to the question of program improvement, these two changes in the program, the first two that we had, came from focus groups that I personally did with the kids at the end of the first semester. So when they were in grade 9, and we said to them, what could we do that would be better? How are you feeling about what we're providing? And they said a couple of very simple things. You want us to come to tutoring, you got to make us come. And if you want, and that we would like to have more activities in the community, we can call them mentoring activities, and we would like them every week. Well, we couldn't financially, we didn't have the space in the community, we couldn't rent space to be able to provide weekly activities, but we could do it bi-weekly. So we went back at the end of that semester and we redesigned things for the next term. And this went through staff and went through the health center to be able to say, okay, how could we take that very important data that we collected in these focus groups with the kids in that very first cohort and change fundamentally the nature of the program, improving it. And it certainly did improve it. But we'll talk about some of that in a minute. So we went and we modified our delivery, in this case by changing how we did tutoring and mentoring. We collected more data, and we then found out that what we needed to do, and I'll show you how we found this out, we needed to have more of a focus on the special ed kids, the kids who were struggling and needed some help. Learning from experience is mostly done retrospectively. That's what the whole emergent learning process is about. We can call it an action research process. It could go by many names, but it's engaging learning that's intentional, evolutionary, and doing it through the experience that you have. So when you're thinking about, you know, our outcomes and our research and is program improvement something that's about what managers do, I would say firmly yes, but then I'd say it's also what practitioners do. Why do practitioners do it? One is because they have to, on the ground, we do the things that we think we're improving the program by doing. And the second is they, you know, local people, practitioners have the relationships with our clients, the people we're supposed to be serving, in order to find out what's working and what's not. And it certainly affected what we were doing in our planning to be able to do this kind of process without naming it. Some of the other data that we got that we published, I guess we looked at it publicly for a few years and then didn't. And so the first one is that we also, in addition to comparing the Pathways kids to their historical peers and to each cohort as we went along, we also compared them to kids from other communities. That's the chart on the top left. If we go to the top right, we also compared them to peers from the same school so that we could say how are our kids at Central Tech compared to the rest of the kids at Central Tech doing, and they were actually doing splendidly. The third on the bottom right, or bottom left, is we also took data, collected data about their subject credits. So we know that there's an important relationship between subject credits and eventually graduation, particularly in grade 9 and 10. So that's our cohorts over a period of time, first, second, and third cohort and the historical kids. And if you can see on the right, 20% more were getting their math credit through Pathways. There's a question here. Speech is fast, and I'm getting a lot of, it's probably a long and detailed study. Yeah. How is emergent learning, the question from Marcia is, different from action research? They share a number of things. Action research, emergent learning doesn't need to take as its subject a social problem. Action research does. And emergent learning doesn't need to plan its work or do it directly with the participants. Action research tries to say that the participants, I guess in particular adult participants in solving a problem, will be part of the design and conducting the research. Staff at Pathways conducted the research. The kids were involved in it, certainly, and certainly frontline staff gave us a lot of feedback on what kind of research to do and when to do it. And, you know, there were different groups, and I know now some of the graduates of Pathways have gone back and helped to do the research in some of the newer communities. It's probably a long and somewhat academic discussion. There's different forms of action research, but I think Carolyn would say, certainly I feel this way, that the whole of Pathways has been an ongoing action research project. And the emergent learning framework is just a useful one, and we'll see why in a minute. My point in showing you these, sorry, the chart on the bottom right talks about the stream of the students. Were they taking courses at an academic level, at an applied level, or at a mixed level? And essential level came after this. And I should also say breakdowns by gender. Why is this important? It's important because over time, this is the table of contents for an internal report that we did on research, and you can see some of the topics. It was very important for us to peel layer by layer, that 15% that we're struggling in particular, to be able to say what are the kinds of differences that we can see. So we got data from focus groups, as I said, from surveys, from parents, from the kids themselves, from volunteer tutors and mentors who were able to say to us who's engaged and who's not, and what are they getting out of the program. Excuse me. And we could learn, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. And we could, after the second year of the program, do a chart that looked like this. I've blacked out, obviously, the names. But basically, Patrona Eccleston, who was a wonderful admin person for me, and is eventually now she's the research coordinator for Pathways Canada. She began to put databases together herself and began to track these things. And I should tell you, just as a little hint, paper and pencil works just as good as computers do when you have small numbers. And to begin to look at this question about who was succeeding, and the data that you see in front of you was just the beginning of it, but basically what it told us after the end of the second year was it allowed us to make an important program improvement, namely to be able to go to the school board and say there was a group of kids who were identical to another group of kids. Group A were getting some special supports, GLE and GLS classes, learning center type supports, and there was another group identical in almost every way that we could find who were not. And it led to an important program improvement that didn't come from within the program. It took a little bit of work on the part of Pathway staff. But what it really was a change in how the school board helped to move kids from grade 8 to grade 9 and who they identified as needing supports. So this was a piece, I guess, of small s system advocacy to be able to provide that. And it also served to help develop the relations. Patrona developed a much more sophisticated version of this by the end of the fourth year, where we were looking at the first two cohorts complete, and basically asking the question of what were the things that the kids who were struggling were really struggling with that enabled us to make some important decisions about where the program went in terms of direction of some things. The data from here was gotten from these categories that you see, and I can tell you about some of them in particular, but you can see there's a broad category of physical health, of academic challenges that people had, of emotional and mental health challenges, and of other situations that they were in. And I want to focus on a few of these in particular because they were quite important in terms of program improvements. This kind of chart here led us to look at the results, and Patrona actually put it together in terms of some summaries like the one I've got on the screen now. But if we go back to the actual data, we found out that there were three groups of kids who were struggling. That 15 to 20% was made up of roughly equal thirds. A third of them were kids who should have had special ed supports and weren't getting them. And so one of the things that it did was it meant that we needed to do more advocacy work so that they could, in fact, get those supports. And then what we found was even though they were behind, once they had the supports, they would catch up. And so all they needed was some more monitoring after we did that advocacy work to get them the supports through the schools that they needed. The second group was a group of kids who had some form of trauma. A parent died, a brother was shot, there might have been an assault, they might have been involved in children's aid. And these were kids who needed far more intensive supports than we were then providing. And so we needed to work with others within the health center. There was an internal referral process, but also with external agencies that we could partner with, including the school board, social workers, to be able to provide those kids with more support. The third group was also about, let's say, another third, roughly 5% or so, who we wound up saying were not ready for prime time. They didn't want to be in Pathways. They didn't want to be in school. They didn't want to be out in the community. They didn't want to be working. A lot of them wanted to be home playing video games. Some of them wanted to be just hanging out with boyfriends or whatever. And I would say it was important for us to recognize that these were 5%, not 56%. So it was an important lesson for us. If we go back to the categories for a minute, we did make changes in a few areas, and I've tried to highlight those things in colors. So I've already talked about the inappropriate placement and getting their stream right and their their placement right in terms of course and course levels. What you see in green there under D is about low homework expectations. There were a couple schools, one in particular I can think of, where there was no homework assigned. And so when the kids came to tutoring, they really didn't know what they should be doing. This created problems for the staff at tutoring. It also became problems for the kids because it was just another version of how the kids were basically being told by the schools, you don't amount to anything, you don't deserve the respect of giving you homework, our expectations for you were so low, it really couldn't matter. And so what it meant was that very directly the program got involved. I remember calling one of the superintendents at the Toronto District School Board and having a long talk about what the school needed, what the school board needed to do to deal with the principal of those particular schools. And it was really important to be able to say that we needed to have Pathways do that kind of advocacy. The lower no engagement in tutoring meant we had to do a much better job of monitoring and engaging. And what it led to was to a staff position that I raised some money for, to be able to get someone who could work with staff to help them in turn train the tutors to do more one-to-one work with special needs kids, special ed kids. If we go over to the right, you see safe school exclusion and school suspensions. Safe schools was pretty big at that time. There really is some discrimination that happens in that process, and we needed to be involved as a program in finding alternatives for those kids than just hanging around in the community. So we worked around setting up a pilot program that would enable the kids to be engaged and still have the expectation that they would learn. Same with the justice system. There were kids who were involved with the law, not a lot, but some, and it was very important that they continue to be engaged. Pathways was often a bail condition when I was in Regent Park. That is, the kids would be required to, not to be out after dark except for Pathways, that they could go to tutoring or mentoring. And our relationship with the police and with some community-based agencies that were doing intervention work was very important. So these led to very direct changes in the program that improved the ability of the kids to be successful. The emergent learning framework, or a version of it, seems to be on the minds of people at the ministry. This is the Employment Services Business Management cycle. I assume that there will be a similar cycle that becomes part of the Literacy and Basic Skills program and everything else that becomes part of Employment Ontario. But you can see, and I'll leave it to you, I'm not going to go through everything, but it's very similar. Understand the results. That's the same thing as know what you know. Step 2, understand causes. So that's, what's your hypothesis about what you want to do? Third thing, develop implementation plans and improvement plans and carry them out. And then fourth, review, look at the data, review, and adjust it. So to the extent that people are going to be asked to do a simple version of emergent learning, I think it's probably a good thing for people to do. For literacy and basic skills, I worked this up a while ago when we were talking to some of the sectors and streams executive directors, but it really is a similar kind of question. So if we ask the question, what will it take to have more learners make successful transitions? One of the things we know, again, we're not starting from scratch. We know from the literature, we know from our own experience that additional supports make a great deal of difference in whether people can complete their programs, whether adult learners are successful. So we have a mental model that says there are supports beyond literacy that people need. And we can design experiments to test that, one of which is to identify the range of supports for different types of learners and then to provide those supports. Now, this assumes that we do it on more than an individual basis. Any particular program can identify particular supports. From that, we can get data. We can actually look at the ground truth that says who's participating, what kind of transitions are they making, what kind of literacy outcomes do they have, what other assessment things do we do? What, are they satisfied with the program? We can have focus groups that will include feedback about how we're doing. How did we provide those other supports? If it wasn't the literacy program, if it was a partner doing it in the community, how did they feel about that partner and what they provided? Was it in a timely way? We can do all this. That might lead us to a conclusion. I'll highlight that again. Only some supports matter. we need to narrow the range, and we need to improve service coordination. That might be the result of what we find out, in which case we can modify and do a better job, get more data, and then we might decide we really need to provide more targeted counseling. That is, to a few of our learners need a lot more counseling, and we can find a way to provide that. That's what the data tells us. So again, we're going to do this retroactively, conducting iterative experiments. But the experiments we conduct are all going to be based on data. So what do we need to do this kind of work? Where am I in terms of time? I have to move very quickly. So we need to understand that success would be a function of characteristics of learners, of the characteristics of programs, of which there are several, of what learners will achieve, and what they'll do with what they achieve. So there's background information, there's intervention, what we actually do, a learning plan, and then there is assessment and other indicators of client progress and transitions made, and then there's the question of how we do it. So here I've outlined very quickly some questions to consider. The first couple deal with access, who's getting into programs, who's accessing these programs, what are their characteristics, what are the supports they need. Then we need to ask the question of what the available data. So, I mean, I'm understanding that people will say immediately, well, there's some data we can get and there's other data we can't get. Well, from some of the data we get, we know that we're keeping track now centrally about common metrics. There's some program-specific metrics you may want to get. And then there's other intelligence that you get. And we need to ask the question about, are there changes in who is succeeding over time? And here's some of the characteristics that we've talked about, factors affecting success, some of which are internal to the program, and some of which are actually external to the program, like referrals and service coordination. Finally, there's the question of satisfaction. I want to be careful not to equate satisfaction with quality here, but there is that question of satisfaction. So we can ask from all of these things what would be practical to be able to get. So I guess the question would be in terms of quantitative outcomes. What are the kinds of metrics or measures that are used now? Well, we know Employment Ontario has theirs, Pathways developed theirs, ministries of other kinds may develop theirs, but we need to know what those are, and then we need to know what other indicators might be useful. So the same way Pathways had that interim indicator of attendance and credit accumulation, at the end of the day, people wanted to know, funders in particular, but not just funders, who's being successful. And what data will help explain the results. We had a whole slew of kids in one cohort who made it to grade 12, were missing a few credits, and never finished. And Pathways needed to ask, what's going to explain that? And so we needed to focus more on the how of what we do. And that has to do with the different types of feedback purposely collected and the quality of relationships, which we'll talk about again maybe in a second. I'm going to get to some part of it. I want to skip through a few things here. There's some other data that we got from surveys and the like. This is a chart which people have found really interesting. And it's something that any program could do, although it takes a bit of technical help to do it, which is about what is the benefit, what's the social return on investment. It was very important for Pathways. Boston Consulting Group, pro bono, donated their time to be able to develop this with us in 2006 and 2007 at Pathways Canada, and there was a lot of data which went into this. But basically, this basically says that with even minimal second-generation effects, you can see a return of about $50,000 per student for every dollar invested in Pathways. Sorry, for every $1,000. Some lessons related to this that we can talk about. Allison's trying to move me along, so I will. The first is accountability and evidence-based program improvement are both necessary. We've long since passed the time where we can get away without either. We need clear metrics and the discipline to use that data. I don't know what the ministry will do with their data. I do know that all of the data about individual programs is available to program managers and should be the subject of discussion with staff. And then additional data will be needed, and they should be available for everyone to use. There's informal feedback, there's formal feedback. I didn't have to do a survey the 4th year of the program when 2 kids came to me and asked for help with their post-secondary applications. And I said, well, why do you need that help? Aren't there guidance counselors doing this? And the answer is only 2 of 87 kids had gotten any help from their school guidance counselors. Well, what this meant was that there was a very specific need for pathways to fill that gap. And it was everything from the fact that these families don't have credit cards to be able to put in an application through OSAP or through OCAS or UYAC, the University Application Center. So they needed that very practical help, but then they also needed the help to know about programs. And the success rate of Pathways kids being accepted and attending colleges and universities, it's now 80% of graduates in Regent Park that are going on. I think that's similar to the first generation, first cohorts of the new sites. It used to be 20% in Regent Park, so it's a huge increase. We need detailed qualitative data to find out what's working and what's not, and for whom, and to get new directions or approaches, and give up old ones. Clearly, Pathways was working for 80% of the kids. It wasn't working for somewhere around 15 to 20% of the kids, so we needed to fix things in order for that to change. Action research is the need to test in practice and then to replicate. And validation, the supportive, personal, human connection that sends the message you belong here. There's a long history in the community college of the term validation, in the community college literature. It's very important to think about this. If Charlie Ledbeater is right, all social services, all human services will be required to tread that line between being an effective and efficient system and having the personal relationships. And you don't get those personal relationships if people don't believe they belong. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I'm not sure it's terribly useful. I wanted to end with these, one slide after this, but these couple of slides. In the 5th year of my being a Pathways counselor, so it would have been 2 years ago before I left, we had agreed and went to the board with a new set of indicators that use some of the old indicators that are in blue, data we already have, as well as data we have but weren't using systematically, which are those purple numbers or sentences indicators, and then green meant new data that we might have to get. In that first block around performance indicators, we had most of those things already. You can see 9 of those 10 things we had. We simply needed to clarify what the targets were. The next set around quality relationships, we had a lot of data that we weren't using, surrogate measures. That when we asked staff, what are the ways in which you know that you've got a good relationship with the kids? What are the ways that a program director, and we had 6 of them around the table when we designed this, and 11 of them have seen it since, program directors saying, okay, what would you say tells you about the quality of relationships staff has? These were a number of the things that came up. The last one, for example, the last 2 that we needed to develop new data about is a good example. Students who were in trouble. And there were categories of it. Are they in trouble with the law? Are they in trouble in the community? Are they in trouble, with family things, trouble with teachers? What are the struggles, children's aid? What are the kinds of difficulties they're dealing with? Mental health issues? Are they, anorexic? Are they, bordering on personality issues? What are the things they're dealing with? There's a lot of trauma in refugee communities and in, communities that are vulnerable in other ways as well. We needed to track those better, and then we needed to know not just about referrals made, but referrals taken up, that's a good measure of what kind of trusting relationship you have with the folks you work with is, do they actually take you up on the referrals that you make? Are they willing to trust you enough to actually go? Then there were program management questions, and I won't go through this, but an audit of case notes that had to be done for the health center periodically is really important. If I were to look at the notes of staff, would I in fact be able to see examples of the quality of programs? And were the notes good? Were they complete? There are some legal questions involved here, but more important is, are we doing what we need to do in terms of how we monitor things? The responsiveness of the program is directly related to this. You'll see for each program element, changes being planned. This is data we already got and we already asked programs to report on, namely to say that any time you said you want to change the delivery of a program element, you needed to be able to say what that was based on. And that's the notion of evidence-based program improvement. So it's really important. I don't know whether government-funded programs will do this, but certainly none of the directors thought this was an unfair request. That when they were, submitting their budgets every year, when they were reporting on their achievements during a year, that they be able to say, our plans from next year mean we want to change tutoring in a particular way, and here's the rationale for it. That's what evidence-based program improvement means. So these are things that you can do internally. I started out not as the big man at the funding agency at Pathways Canada. I was just a guy doing a program, and this is what we did. Lastly is a cartoon that John McLaughlin and I have laughed about for many, many years. If instead of program proposal, you put a 50-page research that needs to be summarized as governments and funders want us to do, only Dilbert, of course, needs to do it in one paragraph. And lastly is the question of, I feel obligated to say something about our customers, to which Dogbert replies, I'm glad I'm not one of them. We need to remember all the time why we do this. We don't do this because the ministry wants us to, or another funder tells us we have to do these things. We do this because we serve folks, and we need to serve them better. We need to serve more folks more efficiently, and we need to serve more folks more effectively. And thinking about who our customers are means listening to them. It means working with learners. It also means thinking about how to make what they do and what we do more effective. I'm running about 4 or 5 minutes late. I'm open to any and all questions. I really wished I could have seen all of you, because some of you would have been asleep, some of you would have been answering email, and some of you probably would have been playing solitaire, which I'm sure would have been a better use of time. So, some of the questions we have, Allison. Oh, okay.
Hi, everyone. If you have a question, if you can put it, just type it here in the questions pane. We've had a lot of questions about the slides. We won't be forwarding the slides, but they will be recorded and placed online, and you'll get an email from us shortly where you can find that link and share this webinar with others. So, but if you do have any questions for Norm, just please put it in write it in the question pane, and he'll answer them while we're here. But
this is the time where I would look at everybody and say, was it all a big blank? Some people have said I went too quickly, and I do apologize for that. If I went much slower, I wouldn't have gotten through very much. I hope it was useful. I know it's just a taste of things. Could Norm speak more specifically about what LBS programs could be doing to track process issues, i.e. what data is already available and what's missing? Bridget. Hi, Bridget. I think that through the EOIS CAM system, that there will be data that will be readily retrievable certainly for every individual in each program, that any program manager can download and share with staff, but also the aggregate data, that is the collected data for all the learners in their program. That will include everything from how they came to be in the program, that is who they were referred by, or did they walk in, to what the program elements that they're doing are. So there will be, for example, elements that are most of the things on the learner plan template that people got exposed to last year, and that is now online. Now, some of the very specifics on the learner plan template are not there, so the specific activities that practitioners are doing with learners are not listed. But there are things about the categories of activities. You'll be able to track, for instance, the assessment results about learner gains and the like, pre and post. You'll be able to track whether referrals were made, were they taken up, were they successful. You'll be able to track the milestones. I think the milestones at the culminating outcome measure, I forget what it's called, culminating tasks will be there. and there'll be all the usual follow-ups. What happened to the person afterwards? Where did they go? Were they successful or not? In which ways? All of that can be, how would I put it? The data can be downloaded, I gather, from EOIS for your own program in an Excel spreadsheet that will allow you to download individual cases, all individual cases, and manipulate the data. So, for example, it could all be sorted by, all the folks who came with a high school diploma, or all the folks who came who had no more than grade 9. It can be sorted by, you'll be able to know what time people spent, within, the program. Did they spend, on average 4 hours a week for 6 months, or did they spend, 40 hours a week for 6 weeks? One will be able to say what kind of activities they were in. Were they group activities, classroom? Were they one-to-one? Were they online and supported? I don't know, Bridget, does that help? Don't answer, Bridget. How did you track youth who graduated from post-sec, became employed, et cetera, years after they left the program? I don't know, Janet. I would like to say that's specifically why I left Pathways Canada, because we couldn't do it. No. We actually have, and part of that has been through the OSAP system, because when people graduate or when they no longer are taking student assistance, we know that now. There's a big alumni network of the Regent Park grads, and now beginning to be an alumni network of the Pathways grads from Lawrence Heights, Ottawa, Kitchener, and Rexdale as well, and soon to be some of the other sites. So there's a wonderful staff member who actually began in Regent Park who's doing that work now, and I'm hoping that there will be results that are available for that. Right now we don't have them. I can tell you the results from Regent Park about kids getting access to colleges and universities, and it's wonderful. But how many of them were actually successful and over what period of time, I can't tell you. I wish I could. That's it. Good. We're pushing 2 minutes left to go. I don't know if folks have a question. I can offer just one more thing to folks, which is that I'm available by email if you have other questions, and rather than send them all to Allison, not that there'd be that many, but I'd rather you can send them directly to me. I continue to have some nice connections to employment, Essential Skills Ontario, so that's been a very nice relation to me. But my email address is Norman, Norman, Rowen, Rowen, at simpatico.ca. And please say it's related to the webinar so that I know you were there. Anyway, I'm sorry I can't see all your faces. I hope people are having a restful summer and rejuvenating themselves, and hopefully getting back to work and working well together. So thanks so much. I'll turn this back over to Allison.
That's it. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll be sending a follow-up email very soon with the recording. So thank you very much. Amber, how do I stop this? Ours is still going.
We're muted, so it's okay. Anything you say here.